It's Charter California edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. We are joined by the mayor of Pasadena, Bill Bogaard, and we thank you for joining us, sir. And I know recently you were in Sacramento. You were testifying about a bill dealing with charter cities. Before we get into the weeds on the bill, for our viewers, what exactly is a charter city versus it's called a general law city?
Brad, in California, there are two categories of cities that exist among the 480 total cities in the state. Some are general law cities, some are charter cities.
Right.
And charter cities are chartered under the Constitution directly by a legislative action. And the charter cities have somewhat greater powers than general law cities.
General law cities will operate pursuant to California laws.
Exactly.
Whereas charter cities have some discretion. They can pass their own municipal laws.
Exactly.
So in Southern California, as an example, Pasadena, Los Angeles, I mean, some major cities are charter cities. Sacramento is a charter city. I know recently there was an election in a small municipality in San Luis Obispo County called Grover Beach. And that election got caught up in a debate relating to labor rights and union rights. And ultimately, the Charter City Initiative failed by 4 votes. And there's no question that the labor community has become very active in charter cities development. What can you tell us about that issue?
Well, I think labor unions resist the independence of charter cities to determine whether to incorporate prevailing wage into the construction projects that the cities support.
And what exactly is prevailing wage?
Prevailing wage is a level of compensation for the workers involved in construction that is equal to union wages.
Okay.
It's a higher level, and the argument is it results in a higher quality of worker and provides, of course, a better lifestyle.
Under state law, all construction projects that use state money must comply with prevailing wage.
The answer to that is yes.
Regardless of whether the project is built in a charter city or a general law city.
That's true.
There is a bill, and that is why you went to Sacramento, that would change that formula. Tell us about SB 7 and your recent testimony.
SB 7 is a bill that has strong support among Democrats in the legislature this session, which would provide that charter cities would not receive state grants for infrastructure in the future unless they had an affirmative policy imposing prevailing wage on every construction project that each city does.
So this would be a big change, because under the law now, if you accept state money, you, a city, you agree to pay prevailing wage. That's not in question.
That's
true.
But
what this law would say is you have to accept prevailing wage for all your projects if you are to take any state money.
That's exactly right. So if a city were to do 10 projects in a year, 9 of them were state funded and therefore prevailing wage, the city exercised its discretion not to go prevailing wage, they would be disqualified
from the 9.
From future grants.
So tell us about your testimony. It was, you got the great voice and an imposing figure. What'd you say?
Well, what I said was not to debate the prevailing wage, because prevailing wage is a very strongly felt issue on the Democratic side of the aisle.
And you're a Democrat.
I'm a Democrat.
Right? So it's not a partisan issue with you.
I recognize, exactly not. I recognize the role that prevailing wage plays, that it has a role, but I also recognize that local government should have the flexibility to make decisions depending on the project, depending on the funding that's available, to go with prevailing wage or not.
Now, I understand that one could argue under a California Supreme Court case decided in 1979, Sonoma County public employees versus the county, that this law could be suspect.
Well, the League of California Cities definitely believes it's suspect because the Sonoma case quite clearly said that once the voters have approved a charter city, a
right.
charter for a city, they are in control of certain issues referred to as municipal affairs. The use and invocation of prevailing wage is one of those issues, supposedly protected by the Constitution. So we're going to probably have occasion to see, assuming that SB 7 moves forward.
Right, as we speak today, it's moving through various committees.
Exactly, and if that's ultimately adopted, and if it's signed by the governor, we might well see a court case testing whether the rights of voters in charter cities that we believe exist will be recognized with respect to that bill.
There's no question that since Governor Brown took office, he has, I'll just use this term, waged war. I don't know that I don't mean to take a position, but waged war on cities and their ability to manage their funds as they so choose. We see this prevailing wage initiative, redevelopment was eliminated. We're now looking at an attack on enterprise zones. Before I ask about enterprise zones generally, does Pasadena have any enterprise zones?
We have enterprise zones. It's been a very important part of our economic development over 25 years.
And so explain what an enterprise zone is and how Pasadena, as an example of any city in this state,
under existing enterprise zone law, if a city can demonstrate that the economics of a portion of the city are in need of boosting economically, then the city can qualify as a zone, an enterprise zone, and the employers who make hires thereafter get tax subsidies through a tax credit per employee.
And it's not similar to redevelopment where a certain amount of property tax increment is taken. This is a completely different animal.
It is. And statewide, the governor's pointed out, it involves an expenditure of about $750 million, which provides the subsidy to create jobs in these areas of California that are in need of economic development.
And I understand there are about 40 enterprise zones in the state. I also understand that there is a bill marching through the legislature that could change the face of enterprise zones. At first, we thought they could be eliminated entirely. Now, through some negotiations, it appears that they may survive in some form. And while there may be some grandfathering of existing enterprise zone practices that on a go-forward basis, it would really change the face of enterprise zones.
Well, there definitely would, and it comes on top of the loss of redevelopment, which was a strong economic development tool for local government. One
of the areas that most are talking about is that retailers would be eliminated from the ability to participate in enterprise zones. Small businesses may have some exemptions. And I understand a lot of that is focused upon big box stores. What's your sense of the exclusion outright of retailers in any future enterprise zone?
I think it's something that should be talked about. The governor, in his advocacy to eliminate or to dramatically modify enterprise zones, has said that what's most important is job creation, jobs that create a middle class. And so he's talking about manufacturing as opposed to retail. And it is true that many retail jobs are part-time, and many of them are under contract without benefits and so on, so that they don't, in the governor's judgment and maybe in a fair discussion, have the kind of community economy building power that other kinds of jobs might have.
What's your sense of where enterprise zones move from here?
There's no question in my mind that enterprise zones will undergo some significant change, if they're saved at all.
Okay, his name is Bill Bogaard. He is the mayor of the beautiful city of Pasadena. My name is Brad Pomerance. You are watching Charter California Edition. It's Charter California edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Ling-Ling Chang. She is a member of the Diamond Bar City Council, but she is also the current president of the Los Angeles chapter of the League of California Cities, which is what?
League of California Cities is an organization that advocates for certain policies up at the state level, and interacts with legislature and the governor on some key legislative issues.
And I think it's fair to say it's been a tough few years for cities in California.
Yes.
There's no doubt that the state has faced fiscal crises, and this particular governor has looked to find money wherever he could. And what he has done, and I'm not commenting, I'm just stating, is we saw the elimination of redevelopment, which was a tool that cities used to incentivize economic development. Recently, we saw enterprise zones transform dramatically to a shell of their former selves. How has the league faced this? It's been tough.
It has been tough because we're representing so many cities, particularly for the LA County division. We're one of the largest divisions in the state. We are the largest division in the state, representing 86 cities, over 450 mayors and council members, and 11 million Californians. So
it's a country.
It is.
11
yes,
million
it is.
people is bigger than, how many, 40 states? I mean, it's a huge region.
Right, and so we've been advocating for local control, local revenue generation, and particularly since local government, that is the piece of government that's closest to its residents, its constituents. Anyone has a problem, you go to your local.
You start first. You start with your cities.
That's where you start.
Right.
And so, it's been a hit to our local cities. Especially given the economy and.
Right. So how are cities? You can use Diamond Bar as an example, or any of your cities, dealing with the all but elimination of these incentive programs that you used to bring in or retain business? No redevelopment. Enterprise zones a shell of their former selves.
Well, particularly for Diamond Bar, we had a redevelopment agency, but no projects. So we kind of lucked out there.
All right, so you didn't lose much.
However, using Diamond Bar as an example, last year when I was mayor, we were able to open up a new civic center with new city hall, new county library, 3 new parks, improvements to a trail system, and yet we have 76% of our budget in reserves. So, do we want the state come down and raiding our coffers? That's what we don't want.
Right.
Because, hey, we've been doing such a great job, here at the local level, protecting our citizens' best interests,
Is Diamond Bar a general law city or a charter city?
General.
So that means that your laws are essentially the laws of the state.
Right.
But there are about 121 charter cities in the state, and they have their own mini constitutions.
Right.
I know that the president of the California League, Bill Bogaard, mayor of Pasadena, recently traveled to Sacramento to testify against a bill that would have changed, or still could change, the face of charter cities.
Right.
In this instance, if I may explain, what the bill would do is, if a city wants to accept any state funds, they have to agree to pay prevailing wage for all its projects, not just projects where there's a prevailing wage that's already going to be attached to it because they got state money.
Right.
It's another example.
Yes.
Of Sacramento coming in and trying to change the way cities operate.
Right, and particularly since cities are, yes, you have 1 or 2 examples that aren't so great in terms of cities, but that should not be applicable to the rest of the cities in the state, and that's why we've been advocating for local control. For example, like Diamond Bar, like Pasadena, and many other cities, we're doing so well. I mean, we did a poll with our residents. An overwhelming 97% were happy with our parks and recreation services. And so, do we need the state coming in and telling us what to do and pushing mandates? We're completely against that.
So what's the future for cities of California? I mean, we really are a state of urban cores. I don't want to take away the beauty of our rural communities or our suburban communities. I mean, in some way, Diamond Bar is, a suburban bedroom community, but it's still a city.
Yes.
And so where do cities go from here?
Well, again, it goes back to continuing to advocate really through the League of California Cities and our partners advocating for local control because it's worked. You know, cities are flourishing. You know, it's just that we have to take a hard look, or the state needs to take a hard look at, you know, some reforms, you know, pension reform, benefit reforms, you know, when we're talking about that.
One could say it's a bit ironic that as the state is trying to deal with its prison overcrowding crisis by sending prisoners down to the locals and asking them to use their local resources and local control.
Which they're taking from us.
Right. And so it's an interesting dynamic. I'm not sure if the league has taken a position on this. I can't remember. I know your aide had sent me some information, so forgive me. But let me ask you about this. And if you don't know, I understand. Currently, to pass a bond measure, the voters need to pass it by 67%. There's some exceptions for school bonds. It can be passed by 55%. There is some legislation pending that would change the formula and would allow localities, we're back to local control, to pass bond measures overall with a 55% majority. Has the league come out in favor or opposed to this yet?
You know, I believe there were some discussions, and I am not quite sure whether or not we've taken a hard position as of yet, because again, you know, in our area, particularly LA County, you have the coastal cities. You have different pockets that are completely just
disparate from each other.
You know, very, very different. You know, and so we tend to just focus on issues again, that pertains. You know, our focus #1 issue is economic development.
So you're the president of the biggest league or region of the California League. How do you handle those disparate interests? I mean, this is not, like you said, almost every city in LA County, 86 out of 88 cities. You know, from Manhattan Beach to Diamond Bar. I mean, two beautiful communities with completely different challenges.
Yeah, so we've actually had several meetings on what our focus should be. And basically, we want to find common ground on certain issues, you know, that pertain to the whole entire county. And so that's why we came down with, we were able to focus on economic development, and that's a priority, as well as some of the other issues like some stormwater challenges.
Okay. That being said, we are one big happy LA County family, but there's no doubt there's competition between cities. I mean, Diamond Bar wants to take businesses from Pomona, and I'm just using that as an example. So how do you bridge that gap where, you know, you're competing for the same businesses to move into each other's cities or not to leave another city?
Yeah, so each city, and again, it really depends on the city. They may provide incentives on their own, you know. But it's interesting. I've been really trying to recruit some businesses to come into our city.
Of course.
Retailers tend to have their own formula in terms of what they're looking for. You know, if they're looking at a 3 to 5 mile radius in terms of population density, you know, traffic count, demographics, and all of that.
But
so each city is
Diamond Bar has done pretty well. I mean, I've gone to soccer tournaments there, if I may say, with my daughters, and you know, you have a nice retail core, a great diverse population, some outstanding restaurants, if I may say.
Oh, thank you.
If I may say, many with Asian flavors, which I particularly enjoy. And so, are you able to continue to march down that path of more retail development, or are you looking towards other types of development as well? Because it does seem your retail is doing quite well.
Yeah, well, we're still looking for more retail. You know, we want more goods and services for our community. You know, so that we don't have to travel elsewhere, and obviously keeping the sales tax base, you know, in our city. So we're still focused on that. We're also looking to assist current retailers in terms of maintaining their businesses.
Okay, her name is Ling-Ling Chang. She is a council member in Diamond Bar. She's also the president of the Los Angeles chapter of the League of California Cities. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition. Welcome back to Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Jacque Robinson. She is the Vice Mayor of the City of Pasadena, and I recently spoke with your Mayor, Bill Bogaard, and one of the issues that we discussed was the essential elimination of enterprise zones as we know it. It appears that's the path we're taking. Before we talk about the revamping of enterprise zones, give us a sense of how Pasadena, as an example of any California city, used enterprise zones.
Well, of course, we know that Pasadena's old Pasadena,
Right.
some people refer to as Old Town, is a result of enterprise zones and, the many benefits that it can take with the city that, is doing the right thing and using it in the right way.
Right.
Pasadena is a world-class city today, and a lot of that can be attributed to the growth of Old Town. Even in my district, in District 1, we are enterprise zone, which runs along Lincoln Avenue. And, it's been beneficial to, convincing developers that this is the place to be. They can get those extra tax credits to benefit the surrounding community by hiring local community
Right.
residents. And so I just think that it's going to be a blow to local economies all over the state.
And this is on the heels of the elimination of redevelopment. And
Exactly.
Pasadena had redevelopment zones as well?
We had redevelopment zones as well, and so I think with the elimination of redevelopment and the enterprise zones, I think we're going to see, a further decimation of local cities' ability to grow in this, recession that we're not quite out of yet.
Right. That being said, enterprise zones aren't completely out of the picture. There are versions of incentives that cities can use if they have an enterprise zone. Tax exemptions for manufacturing and biotech research companies. There can be some case-by-case tax negotiations. What do you think of that?
I mean, I can appreciate that they tried to keep some semblance of the program, but I think for many communities like the Lincoln Corridor in Pasadena and other communities throughout the state that have needed those enterprise zones to entice developers to come, where there are, lower income individuals. The exemptions that are being made for biotech and manufacturing facilities aren't going to really make that much of a difference, because unless they're going to be hiring those residents that live around those zones, that's not really going to be beneficial for them.
I do want to ask you, given the I said this with Mr. Bogaard, given the war that Sacramento has waged against cities in terms of their ability to incentivize economic development, where do cities go from here?
Well, I think cities just have to really continue working closely with our fellow legislators in Sacramento. I think it's somewhat disappointing because I know many of the legislators in Sacramento did come from local government, and they've, prior to getting to Sacramento, they saw how much harder their jobs were as a local government official to do when they got receiving these unfunded mandates from Sacramento. So I just really think we're going to have to do a better job of working with our legislators in Sacramento. The mayor does a great job as our current president of the League of California Cities.
And he recently testified in Sacramento. We spoke about this, about a separate issue dealing with charter city reform. But on so many levels, from charter city reform to enterprise zones to redevelopment, it's a tough time.
It is, and I think we have to remember, it's not just about making the policy and putting it on paper. It's about how are we going to implement it so that it, makes a difference.
I want to shift gears, if I may, and talk to you about what's known as the local control funding formula. You are a member of a city council, but I know that you also work with a member of the Los Angeles Unified School Board.
Yes.
And so you have a good sense of where education reform is going. And I want you to give us a sense of how you believe what is known as the local control funding formula will impact Pasadena, Los Angeles County, and the state in general.
Well, it's definitely a win for the Pasadena Unified School District. We are one of the districts in the state that have that high number of English language learners, special education learners within our district, and the local control funding formula adds, an extra base amount of funding to those needy populations within our school district. So Pasadena is going to benefit. Many schools throughout the district are going to benefit. And with the compromise that the legislature was able to pass, because there was concern from members who come from communities that don't necessarily have those high levels of English language learners, that they were going to be losers, so to speak, in it. But there was a compromise,
right.
and I think everybody can be comforted by knowing that every school district in the state is going to get an extra amount of funding throughout the 10 years of its implementation.
We do know that as part of that compromise, we will see the base grant go back to pre-recession levels. And so that was very important.
That was the great equalizer.
Right. That being said, Pasadena in a lot of ways is a microcosm of many communities throughout the region. It has some very well-heeled areas. It has some more challenged areas. And that's the school district's purview. But there are some communities, I can think of communities in the South Bay, around the San Francisco suburbs, where they don't have the more challenged areas. It's simply kind of middle class, upper middle class zones. And as a result, they're not going to see extra money. They will see that base grant return to pre-recession levels, but they're not going to get the supplemental grant well, I guess they would get a supplemental grant for each ESL student or economically disadvantaged student, but they won't see a concentration grant. And the concentration grant, that's where the real money is. It's a 50% bump.
It is, but I think we also have to remember in those communities that, I don't want to say they don't necessarily need the money, because we could all use, extra money to put us above and beyond where we need to be. But I think we also have to remember that not all students start off at the same level. And I think that this extra funding, someone makes it somewhat of an equalizer, because we know that students that aren't starting at a level playing field, they need that extra help, extra tutoring, extra resources, so that they can get to the levels of their counterparts.
I think most folks would agree that there's no doubt, especially with the English language learner side, that extra funding's needed. I mean, it's undeniable. But what's challenging, though, is that there are various needs for a variety of different types of children. This may come off as elitist. I've asked this question before. A gifted child that's not challenged is a terror, is a tyrant. And there's no extra funding for gifted children. In fact, the categoricals have all been eliminated. And so we're so focused on one population, which is important. But what about the needs of other children who may be gifted, for example? What do we do with those kids?
Well, I think that, we've seen that there are existing programs that cater to, the gifted population, so that they can, become even more gifted and advance in their academic studies.
When I think about Pasadena, I'm sure that there's a significant number of gifted students in your school district.
There are, and I think, theoretically, I don't know the exact data numbers, but theoretically, I think it's safe to assume that if a child is gifted, not all the time, certainly not. I was in that category when I was younger, and
you were?
I was a member of PUSD. But I think in certain circumstances, you somewhat assume that the parents of those children that have been categorized as gifted have the personal resources to,
but not necessarily.
But not necessarily, of course. So it's something that has to be balanced, and I think as we see the implementation of the local control funding formula, the legislature always has the power to, amend and edit legislation.
And you have recently announced that you're considering a run, or you are going to be running for the California State Senate.
I am.
It's a few years off. What made you decide to take that move? I mean, you're fluid on these state issues. Why have you decided to do this?
Well, I'm running to attempt to succeed Senator Carol Liu, who's Senate District 25, and by the time that election rolls around, I'll have been on the council for 2 full terms. And I think I've demonstrated my ability to compromise and work together with constituents, our community members, and I think that's sorely needed in the state of California. There are particular issues that I want to work on if and when I'm elected, including education, not being the least of those. But also, there's a need for local legislators to be in the state legislatures
to
so
save
that
enterprise
we can
and
understand,
redevelopment.
How our local officials are going to be working with the state. And there's also a high need for more women to be in our legislature as well. So.
Okay, her name is Jacque Robinson. She's a vice mayor of Pasadena, declared candidate for California State Senate. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition.